Yeah, I think we should start.
All right, I'll share my screen. Okay, so you are in the session about communal catastrophe. My name is Michelle Labgold. I'm the Chief Planning Officer of the Greater Miami Jewish Federation. Abby?
Oh, sorry. Hi, I'm Abby Feinberg. I'm the campaign director here in Miami. Excited to be with you all.
And we were here to share, obviously, the story of how this federation responded and worked with community around the tragedy of the Surfside collapse. But we also recognize that each of your communities has worked in emergency and crisis response, you know, for I'm sure many years, and all of us are dealing with it in this Ukraine crisis. So we thought it would be helpful to just share, and just if a couple people want to share a learning from your own experiences about what you've learned in crisis response before we get started, and we'll see if we can tie into any of that. You can go ahead and take yourself off mute. If you prefer to do it in the chat, you can do it in the chat.
I'll start. I'm Lori from New York, and I feel like New York is also going from crisis to crisis. And I was not working at UJ on September 11, 2001. I joined a couple of years later, but I heard Brian from Pittsburgh say that the reason that they could be there on October 27th is they were there on October 26th. And John Risquet, who's our former predecessor, was famous for saying we were there on 9/11 because we were there on 9/10. And I feel like for every crisis that we've been through, whether it's COVID or Ukraine or whatever it is, I go back and I'm able to share that same story with my donor base, which really makes the statement for the annual campaign.
Thank you. I actually quoted John in the last session, so you've already taken one of our lessons and shared it. Thank you. Anyone else?
I'll add something also from New York. Audrey, hi, I'm the regional director in Westchester. I would just say that I think that, you know, tying this in also to the storytelling piece this morning is that one of the things that I felt really comfortable saying in any donor conversation I've had is that it's also been like an incredible 3 years to work at UJF Federation to be able to be there when we responded to COVID and when we responded to Ukraine. So I think it gave all of us, I'm sure across the country, an opportunity to just talk about how proud we are to work also for the organizations, which I think makes us more, you know, connect better to donors and colleagues when we share that.
Great, thank you. All right, well, we're going to get started, and we'll have some other opportunities to talk together as we go. Really, the objective of this is to understand, you know, what are the lessons that we learned that we can apply to other communities when we're looking at a crisis situation and how we're able to mobilize to meet human needs. So today I'm going to start and talk about the partnerships and the relationships and how we responded. Abby will really go into the details about the fundraising results, and then we'll have some conversation about what are the lessons learned and we can learn from each other. And I think my basic thesis is it's about building the trust and really knowing who your partners are so that you can be prepared to act. So just to set the tone and the context, and I think everybody is familiar with this story. And June 24th, early in the morning, part of the building of Champlain Towers South collapsed in Surfside, and you know, this became a story and became something that the world was watching. It was not only in Miami, it was something that was being seen the world around. There were, just to give you the facts of, there were 136 units in the building, 44 of them collapsed, and we came to learn later that 98 people perished, and hundreds were displaced. And this tragedy really, was playing out over the series of days and weeks and close to a month as we went through the rubble. But in addition to this being a local tragedy, this was also a building and an area with a significant Jewish population. And we know that about a third of those that died in the collapse were Jews. So it also was very personal to us. It was also very personal to us that one of our members of the Federation staff was there in the building and was able to thankfully escape, she and her family, and credits in part her security training at Federation and situational awareness with being able to get out safely. And we just realized that Ophi actually joined us on the call. So just recognizing that Ophi, as you're here, it's even more personal and difficult for you. So thank you for being here. So as you can imagine, it was a chaotic scene. There were government organizations that were involved. There were private other organizations, nonprofit organizations, and then there were a number of Jewish organizations that mobilized, that were there. Federation immediately saw ourselves as a convener, at least of the Jewish community, but also a coordinator with the broader community, whether it be working with the county, whether it be understanding what the Red Cross could do or what FEMA could do, so we could figure out where do we need to fill in, what are the gaps that need to be able to be provided. As soon as we learned of the collapse, the first few actions that we took were to ensure that our social services agency, Jewish Community Services, was mobilized and on scene as quickly as possible that same morning. That our Office of Community Security was there so that they could help get in the crisis counselors and those that needed to provide the support and coordinate with first responders and with other police entities. And that our rabbinic community was mobilized to be able to provide spiritual support. And so they were able to be there immediately and then create an on-call system or a rotation system so that there was always a rabbinic support available. As I indicated, that really we wanted to really understand what everybody was doing and how we could best play a part. There were a number of organizations that were activating to bring in donations to, and in fact, one of the organizations, the shul, that was the closest to the tragedy, was overrun with donations, and there was a great outpouring, but it became difficult to manage all of the physical donations of items. And so really trying to understand where the needs were best, where there could be housing that was offered, and make sure that we were making those matches was really critical. There were a number of organizations that launched fundraising drives, including the Miami Foundation. And an interesting piece is there was a group of young people that had organized themselves to do young adult events in the Jewish community. And they themselves launched a grassroots GoFundMe campaign and raised more than $1 million working with the shul of Bell Harbor. And in the end, they turned to us to help distribute the dollars because they realized that they needed, it was raising the funds was one thing, but figuring out how best to determine how best to allocate it was something else entirely. Things that we did, we immediately launched an emergency campaign, and Abby will go into the numbers and how that played out. We immediately provided crisis counseling and spiritual support. We coordinated volunteer efforts and created a system for immediate financial assistance. So we knew that this was not something where we could, send them a check or pay bills for them like we typically do. We needed to do something much more immediate. So we, through our partnership with Jewish Community Services, who's providing crisis counseling, we ensured that they had gift cards to give out to family members who were in need. We were providing housing assistance and giving them as much support as we could. And we provided funding to our partners to support their work and enabling them to do the work on the ground. We also supported the ongoing case management for families impacted. And I think it's important to share that Jewish Community Services was one of many organizations that was there, Catholic Charities, Red Cross, et cetera, providing crisis support. But they were asked by the county to be the ongoing long-term case management organization. So they were seen as a trusted and capable and had the capacity to provide this in the long term. And so, in the end, we raised nearly $4 million to date. We've distributed about 2.9, and we every day are still getting requests for financial assistance because this is a long-term need. This didn't go away when the headlines went away. People are still being impacted by this tragedy. We were able to leverage some government funding for mental health supports, and we created some new partnerships with organizations that we hadn't known. But to the point that was made earlier, really having the infrastructure in place was really what was critical. Having those relationships where we knew what they could do, what different organizations could provide, and having the trust of the community that Federation's a trusted steward of philanthropic dollars, that we will appropriately vet and make sure the money is getting to the right parties. And we took an approach that was somewhat different than some of the other organizations in terms of funding. We said we're not funding it based upon categories. And I know that different crises, they've said if you experienced X, you get a certain grant. We've been handling it on an individual basis based upon financial need. And so, as I said, we're getting requests for assistance with housing assistance, whether with burial, et cetera. And it's all on an individual basis based upon the individual and the family's needs. So I think, we feel as though, the story that was shared at the beginning and the idea of the infrastructure is in place that allows us to continue to be able to activate in a moment's notice is what's sometimes difficult to describe about federations, but I think is what is our strength. And so we feel like we were able to draw on that strength with the partnerships that we already had and the communications that we had with our partners. So Abby, turning it to you.
Thank you guys. Happy to be here today. Again, what we're talking about today, what happened in the Champlain Towers in Surfside is certainly unique. It's never happened before. God forbid anything like it happens again. But the concept of crisis relief is certainly a space we all live in, like Michelle said. And just wanted to do like a quick chat check-in before we move into the data, which is where I'm going to spend most of my time on the aspects of our community's challenges or opportunities after you heard from Michelle kind of on the scope of the situation and the response and what most resonates with you. So perhaps you could put something in the chat as we keep going. I wanted to just start before I jump into all the data. Michelle said this, but I want to underscore how personal this was for all of us, and how these huge pretty graphs that I'm going to share with you really represent real people, and we're going to share with you the learning that came out of this. But certainly the reason we were there is because it was the right thing to do. Actually, when JFNA first spoke with Michelle and I that this is the avenue they wanted us to go on in the spotlight and talk about Surfside and the response, I said no. I was like, there's not an FRD story here, right? This is about basic human needs and responding. And our response was interdisciplinary. This wasn't about fundraising. But in fact, we weren't even actively fundraising. The $4 million that you saw came in, we didn't ask for it. And the more I thought about it, I realized there really was something powerful from the FRD side. It's about the good work that we do every day, the trust that we establish in the community, and the relationships that Michelle talked about that set us up for this. One of the first CEO I worked with, in Jennifer, you can tell Mark, I'm quoting him, he used to always say that the very best solicitations are the ones where you never have to ask. And that is really, truly what happened here. It's the case that made the story for us. And we didn't do that alone. All of you were there supporting us. Ulfi, who Michelle said is a survivor of this collapse. She may not even remember telling me this in the first few days. She said that one of the most comforting things that happened immediately after was she remembered to take her phone. And every time somebody made a gift online, she'd get a ding. And she got 10,000 dings, 10,000 people that supported this campaign. Every one of those, she said, felt like a hug from one of you, from one of us. And it was really, I'm sure one of many things that held her hand through it. So I want Michelle, let's go to those achievements. Let's talk about those 10,000 dings. This is what we raised and where it came from. So just under $4 million, just under 10,000 gifts. You'll see that orange bar are 8,500 gifts that were under $250. So this really was a grassroots campaign. Only 57 gifts were over $10,000. This was about everybody saying, like, we're here and we're here for you. And it came in fast. I want to go to the next slide. Surfside was June 24th. This is the week after Surfside. 7,000 gifts came in 6 days. This actually shows 9 days, a little bit more. It happened in the middle of the night, first thing in the morning on the 24th. We had the mailbox open that day. 1,000 gifts came in. And the second day, June 25th, 2,600 contributions. So think of that for a moment about what that means, your internal infrastructure. So we're going to get back to that later. So I want you to take a mental picture of this slide, because I'm going to talk about it again. So really, we were there because it was the right thing to do. But let's be honest, there are opportunities in a crisis campaign that we need to take advantage of for our community. So let's go to the next slide. There 10,000 contributions came in. Many were out of town. About a third of them were. Many were people we knew. 1,800 of them were local people who we did not know existed. They were not in our database. We made over 1,800 new accounts locally. And we know, we were joking with some of our New Yorkers about the growth of Miami, not just New Yorkers coming in. We don't know who these people are. They're not affiliating in the same traditional ways we once were. Institutions don't share lists in the way they once do. So as people are coming to town, it's hard to know who they are. And here we created, we identified 1,800 people that were new to Miami, or we didn't know about. Maybe they were here for a while, and they were saying, I'm here, I'm ready, I want to help. And we can now communicate with them. And that's a big deal. We can send them emails. We can talk to them about the good work of Federation. We can report back to them as investors about how we spent the money that they gave us. And we can communicate with them differently based on where they live, based on how much they gave. Our thank you notes were different. And we can solicit them. We can go back to them and talk about the annual campaign. Hey, look, you trusted us when there was a crisis. We did really good work. But we were there before, and we're going to be there after, and please support us again. And we promise to share not just the wins, but also the challenges. For those of you that live in this annual campaign space, you've probably heard your colleagues say, like, why can't you get all those crisis givers to just give every year to the annual campaign? It's not so easy, right? It's not an easy transition, and we're asking them. We sent a direct mail solicitation that spoke to them as a unit in December, 6 months after Surfside. A typical prospect mailing, if you get a 1% return, you're doing great. We got a 2% return, so that's double, but it's not anything we're jumping up and down about. We're going to keep going. We're asking them again for Rosh Hashanah, but our stereotypical annual campaigner, which I am, likes an immediate response. I invite them to get an event, I give them a pledge card, they hand in their gift, like check off my list. This doesn't happen immediate. When we ran a much more longitudinal analysis of crisis contributors since 2005, so almost 20 years, we saw that it was the conversion rate was much higher. Actually, 11.5% of people who had given at some point to a crisis campaign in Miami, a relief campaign, ended up making a gift to annual. So you really have to take more of a long-term approach, and we have to be a little bit more patient than traditionally I'm willing to be, at least. So I want to walk you through, let's go to the next slide, Michelle, this nearly 20 year, this 18-year crisis campaign analysis, because we found a lot of trends that I think are going to be true across the board and true for you. So what we did is, since 2005, we took a look at everybody who's given to a crisis campaign, any type of relief campaign, and we identified trends that really differ based on the size of the response to the campaign. So I'm going to explain that. So if there were 1,000 contributors to the campaign, we saw one set of trends. For the purpose of this conversation, I'm going to call those large crisis campaigns. And if there were under 1,000 gifts, we're going to call them a small crisis campaign. So large is gray and small is red on this chart. So let's start with small. The small crisis campaigns, about 75% of the contributors are regular annual campaign givers. They know us. These are our friends. They want to do something specific to respond to what's happening in the world. And they want to turn to an organization that they know and trust, like Federation, to make that happen. It doesn't happen. It doesn't matter what the crisis is. Is it local? Is it Jewish? From a marketing perspective, they want to think Federation first when they have an inclination to repair the world. And we hope and believe that this will translate into a loyal annual campaign donor base and hopefully long-term estate planning. You can really almost think of it as a service that we are offering to our donor base to fulfill their philanthropic desires. Now, there are those that fear that launching a crisis campaign might take away from the annual campaign. And I am a little embarrassed to tell you that when a hurricane hits the same week that the Rosh Hashanah direct mail hits homes, Jennifer's nodding, thank you. I am like, do we really want to open that mailbox? Is that going to decimate my annual campaign solicitation? And I want to tell you, it really isn't. It is, the dollars are additive. It has a limited effect on the annual campaign. People want to be able to help, and they want to be able to turn to the organization that they trust to do so. So that's on the small. Now let's talk about the large, the gray bars. About 55% versus the 75% are annual campaign contributors. I took Surfside out of these stats. It was much larger. It was different. It doesn't tell the same story because of the worldwide exposure of it. We have more new accounts created. There are more out-of-towners supporting it, and more people from the non-Jewish general community. It's less about a service to our current donor base. It has a wider appeal. It's a way for us to respond to what's happening in the world, show our relevancy, make our case for giving. And a lot of times it'll bring us to the top of the news cycle. For Surfside, we went worldwide, and it was a mass tragedy. And really, in our local history, the closest thing to a similarity that we had was Hurricane Andrew, because of the size of that hurricane and the decimation of our Miami community. We didn't just work with local and national news sources. Our chief marketing officer was fielding calls 24 hours a day from every corner of the globe. Right from the start, as Michelle said, we were positioned as a leading organization with the trifecta of Federation, our Office of Community Services, and Community Security, and JCS, our Human Service Agency. We responded immediately to the psychological, economic, and spiritual needs of our community. Our story was told in the headlines. Michelle, let's go to the headline slide. It might be out of order. Please, there. Oh, she fixed it. She's the best. Our story was told in the headlines. This is just a snippet of what we saw out there. We didn't have to tell our story. The news cycle was telling it for us. We could forward these articles where our CEO was quoted and where the our relief campaign was being positioned as the way to help. This exposure was worth millions of dollars in earned media. We were increasing the equity of our brand at the same time as we were helping people. At its core, this was 100% about doing the right thing, but the press was invaluable in saturating the marketplace about the good deeds of Federation, positioning us as a community convener, and increasing the pride of our donor base. A bit of words of advice for application for you is that you got to be ready to go, right? This isn't about Surfside. When something happens, you got to have a section on your website where the media can download headshots, where there's press releases with contact info, and someone has to pick up the phone 24 hours a day, because when there is a news deadline, like that's it. Like, or do you pick up the phone or do you not? And they move on to the next person. You have to be ready. Accessibility and accountability are crucial here. I want to take a step back for a second from the world of crisis and talk about our regular annual campaign season. This is my beautiful rainbow chart. Each color shows a different year of our annual campaign. This is not crisis contributions. These are just regular annual campaign gifts. You see there's the seasonality of it, right? If you have 12,000 donors to your annual campaign, you don't divide 12,000 by 12 months. You don't have 1,000 gifts a month. You might get these spikes. That's Super Sunday. That's December. That's the week of our main event where we have 1,000 community members come out. I imagine your ebb and flow of gifts has a similar cycle, right? Summer's slower, December's higher. Think about that for a second. I want you to visualize it. Our team and our tools have to be able to expand and contract based on need. Is it okay in the month of December when any donor calls you and asks what's their balance, for you to give them the wrong answer because that check hadn't been processed yet and applied in your database? Of course not. And I'm going to be honest, that happens here. Like our flow in December is super busy and sometimes things aren't caught up. So think about this flow. Think about your busiest week of the year, your Super Sunday, your last week of December. And imagine if in one day your volume multiplied tenfold, 100-fold. What would happen? How would you respond? Now flash back to that first slide I showed you about that week of June 24th when we had that 7,000 transactions in 6 days. All right. Our systems were not set up to handle that. We had to change things, and we didn't fix it right away. It took us quite a while to catch up, but it was an aha moment for us of how we had to adjust our internal systems and be able to expand and contract. That really it took a crisis to get us there, but this is true for all of us on any year. So we reprioritized in the world of data and technology, thinking about data as customer service, right? Sometimes, like our data is on a different floor and you don't connect with your data services team, but really if our data is not right, that's how we're connecting with our customer. And we really need to think of it like that. So our focus and goals became about automation and contracting the amount of time it took to be up to date with transactions, pledges, payments, new accounts. So we redid our internal systems. We invested in automation. And by the next time a crisis hit, and let's be honest, it's a matter of time. That is all becoming a bigger part of our business. By the time we launched the Ukraine Relief Fund earlier this year, we were ready. Our system could expand and contract without changing our protocols. We were able to create those amounts of new accounts and process those high amount of transactions without getting behind in the day-to-day work of what we do. So I'd like to stop and pause here. I know I threw a lot of data at you, and pause and have time for some questions, and we can do questions in a small group. Let's talk. And also, if there's something that we said that spawned an idea for you that you want to take back home and implement. And Michelle, I think we can shut down the slide.
Yeah. Good idea.
I'd rather see your faces.
Abby, you talked a lot about the conversion and what you're doing with the follow-up, but are you also doing targeted prospecting with looking at who the
We are.
nuggets are in that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest that there isn't much in Surfside. So there were the 57 contributions of $10,000 up, and we went through them all then, and I like went through them 2 weeks ago in case I forgot something. There wasn't somebody that came through specifically for Surfside that wasn't on our radar. Maybe some foundations, out-of-town foundations, or businesses that were doing one-time things, but certainly for Ukraine, that's a better example. I can think of one donor that wasn't on our radar that out of the blue gave us $100,000 for Ukraine. And since that time, they're now giving $25,000 to annual campaign. They're now coming on our mega mission. So, we kind of divide the prospecting based on the level of giving. I didn't go there because it wouldn't have been authentic for Surfside. There was actually one person that their first gift to us was a $10,000 gift for Ukraine. They're now giving $50,000 to annual and just gave $100,000 today to Ukraine. But it was like they're dating another major donor. I think it was just happenstance that Surfside came first. Like I couldn't authentically claim it as a Surfside achievement. So I wanted to be real honest. Any other questions?
I have a question. In terms of choosing where you were going to spend your investment, meaning when you wanted to be prepared for the next time and you invested in automation, can you talk a little bit about the process you went through on how to sort of decide where you were going to invest those dollars, and
Sure.
Who did you need to convince to invest those dollars?
Yeah, so it really was, as Michelle and I said, this was a completely interdisciplinary approach, and I really presented pieces that our chief technology officer owned, or our chief marketing officer owned. And this was our chief technology officer. This was her. She said, like, we can't keep up. Like, we don't have the staff, and I need to she created a new system for us to be able to mass create accounts and mass upload pledges and payments that we hadn't had before. And over the summer, we kind of like band-aided it, right? So she would just create it. And then now we've redone our systems. We changed our staffing complement. We have someone that can build these automated systems that we didn't have before. And now it's become part of our regular protocols. So this was kind of we always knew we needed to go here, but this was the aha moment where like you didn't even have to make your case. Like everyone understood. If we had taken every one of our staff people and we had just entered pledges all day long and payments, made new accounts, we wouldn't have been caught up. Like it just took too long the way that we were working before. If you want to know more on like what that coding is, like I am happy to give you her phone number, because like I can't go beyond like she made an upload system. Like that's like where like I would phone a friend. But I can tell you that she's sharing that information with her colleagues on the technology side. So I know that many of our like we have a development team, they have like their tech world, and she's sharing those best practices. No. I can also just share that this didn't end, right? Like this is still ongoing. Michelle said she's still getting requests for funding. We're still incorporating this in our conversations with donors, even though it's out of the news cycle. And I think that, we're all probably in that space with Ukraine, right? It was like top of the news cycle. It isn't anymore. We're still raising money for it. And so the stories that we're getting from Michelle and her team on the requests for funding are helping us make our case to our donors. When we talk about, the importance of funding infrastructure and how it isn't the most sexy. That story of those 3 young people that started the GoFundMe and raised $1 million and then didn't know how to give it away, is a really powerful story with our donors. Like they love it, it's all true. And they love that, right? Like it makes the case for why a federation without us having to make it ourselves. So, you know, we're using those stories every day and incorporating them into our case for giving. Okay. Well,
Thank
Michelle and I are here if you have any questions. Otherwise, thank you. Tell your friends. We'll be back tomorrow.
Thank you for joining us.